Elections. The only excuse for a grown man to kiss a stranger's baby and not have the cops called. As you may know, there is an important election coming up.
We're just about a year away from when American voters will head to the polls and choose the next president of the United States.
Can Ben Carson actually win the Republican nomination?
Can Bernie Sanders take Iowa and New Hampshire?
The biggest question right now is, will Vice President Joe Biden throw his hat in the ring?
Will Al Gore run for president?
No, he won't. And who gives a shit? It's still a year from now. By the time it's done, the 2016 election will have lasted the entire lifespan of a hamster, from birth all the way to popsicle stick grave. We should not be talking about the 2016 race when America has very important elections taking place this Tuesday. In just 2 days, there are gubernatorial and/or legislative elections taking place in these 4 states, and many other people will be voting in local elections or on important referenda, like Washington State's Initiative 1401, which would prohibit people from selling, buying, trading, or distributing parts of elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, cheetahs, and pangolins. And if you're wondering what a pangolin is, let me show you.
The pangolin is not very ferocious. It doesn't even have teeth. And it's not very fast. In fact, it has to wobble on its hind legs and tail.
What is that ridiculous mess? It looks like the result of a stegosaurus making love to an artichoke. And look, if you're thinking right now, well, I don't live in one of those 4 states and I'm not a pangolin, why should I give a shit? Well, let me tell you, there are American lives at stake here. Because a number of these elections could determine whether hundreds of thousands of people remain in or even fall into what's known as the Medicaid gap. And I know that sounds like a terrible clothing chain where you can buy khaki hospital gowns sewn by children in India, but amazingly, it's even worse than that. Meet Kathy Owen, a Texas woman who can't afford insurance, has a family history of colon cancer, and is desperately saving up for a colonoscopy.
$8,000 stands between me and maybe another 20 years of my life if I have colon cancer. But I find myself now, at 53, with grown kids, in serious need of help. Hard to ask for, but absolutely necessary.
That's just terrible. $8,000 should not be the difference between living or dying. It should be the difference between buying this authenticated bass guitar signed by Paul McCartney and this baseball supposedly signed by Kanye West. And, by the way, why does that object exist? Is Kanye West interrupting baseball games now? I'm gonna let you finish this pitch, but my signature is the greatest signature of all time. Of all time! And look, if your instinct is, wasn't Obamacare supposed to solve this kind of problem? Well, yes, you're right, it was. To oversimplify things just a bit, the idea was, under Obamacare, people without insurance would be split into 2 groups. Those who made upwards of 138% of the poverty line would be eligible to buy insurance with subsidies up to a certain point. And as for the poorest Americans, Medicaid, which had previously generally applied to children, their parents and the disabled, would have been expanded to include everyone else. At which point, with everyone insured, America was supposed to go outside, brush the dead leaves off the trampoline and celebrate with a backflip and a broken tibia. The Supreme Court even famously upheld Obamacare in 2012. What you may not remember is that even that very day, there were hints it may not have been an unequivocal victory.
John Roberts sided with the 4 liberal justices, voting 5-4 to uphold nearly all of President Obama's health care law.
And there's the problem, because nearly all is not a reassuring statement. Healthcare is like a pair of gym shorts. Even if it covers nearly all of what it's supposed to, you're still left with some problematic gaps and terrible things can happen. Let me explain. The Supreme Court struck down the part of the law which enabled the government to force states to expand Medicaid, which meant states could choose to reject the expansion, even though that would be an odd decision. Under the law, the federal government would pay 100% of the costs for the first 3 years, eventually decreasing to 90%. And I can't think of anything I would not buy if I only had to pay 10% of the price. Fred Claus on DVD? I mean, no thank you, but yes, I'll take it. Vince Vaughn is always good for 49 cents worth of yucks. Basically, for relatively little of their own money, states could cover all their poorest citizens. It was an exceptionally favourable deal. But guess what many states chose to do?
Texas will not be participating in Medicaid expansion.
They're working hard to change the American dream into the European nightmare.
This system we call Obamacare that we now see is going to be a train wreck, and I do not want the name of Mississippi emblazoned across that train when it leaves the tracks.
Would you consider expanding a broken system? Of course not. Of course not. It's like a drug dealer. You give them your first hit free, and then they're hooked for years and years.
Yeah, except in this instance, that drug addict has cancer, the drug being pushed is chemo, and the corner boys have 7 years of med school. 20 states have so far declined to expand Medicaid, leaving over 3 million people in the Medicaid gap. People in the illogical situation of not making enough money to receive government assistance. Just listen to LaShawn Horde, a diabetic who at one point was forced to reuse needles to save money.
I don't make enough money to get the insurance through the federal government, and then I make too much to get Medicaid. And I cannot afford the insurance that's offered at my job. So I'm just hanging in the air. It's hard to explain how disappointing it is.
Okay, the word disappointing does not quite cover it. Disappointing is your child dropping out of college to be a street mime. Gerald, your mother's devastated. Do not pretend you can't hear me inside that glass box. I know you can hear me, Gerald. This kind of situation is not disappointing, it's tragic. The frequent argument for states refusing the expansion is they couldn't bear the increased cost. Although it is worth noting that, to their credit, even fiscally conservative Republican governors like Jan Brewer, Chris Christie, Mike Pence and John Kasich did expand Medicaid in their states, despite being firm opponents of Obamacare.
I don't support Obamacare. I want to repeal it, but I did expand Medicaid because I was able to bring Ohio money back home to treat the mentally ill, the drug addicted, and to help the working poor get health care. Because you oppose Obamacare doesn't mean when you have an opportunity to bring these $14 billion of Ohio money back to Ohio, that's not Obamacare, that's Medicaid.
You know what? Good for him. Good for him, although it's a bit weird when accepting billions of dollars to give healthcare to poor people is somehow a brave and noble stand. When all Kasich technically did was see a dump truck full of money backing into his driveway and just not say stop. All of which brings us back to Tuesday's elections, because in these 3 states, they could determine the fate of Medicaid expansion. So let's start with Mississippi. Their incumbent governor, Phil Bryant, opposes the expansion. The good news is his opponent has promised if elected, he'll expand it. The bad news is his opponent is this guy.
Political experts in Mississippi were stumped when the long-haul trucker who ran no campaign to speak of and who was essentially unknown outside his own home was elected as the Democratic nominee to be governor.
Spent how much in this race?
Maybe $50, $60.
$50, $60 on the whole campaign.
Right.
No signs in the yard, no bumper
signs,
stickers.
No anything.
Gray's run for the nomination was so low-key, he forgot to mention it to his own mother.
I called him and I said, Robert, you running for governor?
And I was like, no, he would have told us. And she's like, no, it's him.
Holy shit! There is a difference between running a low-key campaign and not having name recognition within your own family. And if you're wondering how on earth he got that nomination, well, some people have a theory.
Some think it's simply because Gray's name was the first on the ballot. Others say it's because he has a traditional man's name.
He is a male, and this is Mississippi.
Oh, he's a male and this is Mississippi. It's depressing when that's all you have to say and everyone understands. It was an attractive goat and this is West Virginia. I get it. I don't need any more details. We're on the same page. It's pretty clear at this point Robert Gray is not going to be the next governor of Mississippi, so let's move on to Virginia, where the obstacle to Medicaid expansion is their state legislature. For anything to happen, Democrats would first have to gain 2 Senate seats, and one of the Senate's leading opponents of expansion is Dick Black, whose name, yes, sounds like a category heading in an adult bookstore, but believe me, he's considerably less fun than his name suggests. For instance, he once sent a thank you letter to Bashar al-Assad commending him for his extraordinary gallantry in his war against terrorists. A letter Assad posted to his Facebook page, which I'd say was the worst thing he'd ever posted on social media if it weren't for this genuine Instagram photo of his windshield on a rainy day, which Assad actually tagged #rain, #morning, #photo of the day, #best of the day, #Instagood, #Syrian presence. Assad abuses hashtags almost as much as he abuses the Syrian people. And by the way, Bashar al-Assad is not alone in getting surprising envelopes from Dick Black.
Years ago, when he was in the House of Delegates and sponsoring an anti-abortion measure, he left envelopes on senators' desks with little plastic pink fetuses inside.
Well, that is revolting. It almost makes you wish that Dick Black, who was running in Virginia, was legendary accordionist Dick Black. I'm sure he could find a great campaign song from his actual album, A Taste of Dick Black. A Taste of Dick Black. Now, is that relevant to what we were talking about? Absolutely not. But you cannot deny it's a nice palate cleanser after you just heard the phrase plastic fetuses. But perhaps the most striking election this year is in Kentucky, where they did expand Medicaid, and by all accounts, it has worked brilliantly. Kentucky has seen the nation's steepest drop in the rate of uninsured residents. Only an idiot would try to undo that. Which brings me to gubernatorial candidate Matt Bevin. He has been accused of wanting to end the expansion and kick people off Medicaid, something he denies.
You're hearing things that I'm supposedly saying, which in fact I've never said. I've never said I'm going to kick people off of Medicaid.
All right, OK, fine. You never said that. Well, I presume that means that this footage does not exist.
The fact that we have 1 out of 4 people in this state on Medicaid is unsustainable, it's unaffordable.
So if you were governor, you would undo his executive order to expand Medicaid?
Absolutely. No question about it. I would reverse that immediately.
The only rational explanation is that Matt Bevin has cloned himself, and his clone, Bat Mevin, is even stupider than he is. And what makes his opposition to government assistance especially hard to take is that he heads up a family bell-making business whose Connecticut factory sadly burned down a few years ago. So what did this staunch, small government, free market advocate do?
Owner Matthew Bevin vows to rebuild, and he may be getting some help.
Senator Blumenthal vows to explore EPA grants for cleanup, possible small business loans, and potential resources from FEMA and other federal agencies.
Your kind offer to basically form Team Belltown is critical.
Now, to be fair, Team Belltown did not receive federal assistance. Bevin did, however, get a $100,000 state grant to reopen his factory. So if Matt Bevin ends up winning, I presume he'll give you healthcare as long as you cover yourself in bells and set yourself on fire. But the real irony here is that Bevin did not have insurance to cover the fire because he claimed no company would insure the buildings for a price that made sense. That's right. Because the cost of insurance was too high, he needed to turn to the government for help. And quite frankly, Matt Bevin, that should ring a f***ing bell. And yet, as of right now, his race is considered a toss-up. He could win, just like Dick Black could win, and just like Robert Gray definitely won't. So on Tuesday, even if you don't live in a state holding an election, spare a thought for the people who do, because the results may ultimately affect the health of 500,000 people and, of course, one ridiculous-looking animal.